after-school entertainment.
I got nothing.
You always have something, yeah. There's always a dance goat story.
So there's this goat. This message from Tammy. Okay.
No, the farmer who's looking for the goat does.
She said
Yeah.
she went to the hills and apparently whatever told the goats talking. We'll have some or might have some influence on tomorrow. So we'll see how it goes. All of us are still.
So.
Whatever it was.
That's probably me. Yeah, it does look like we're live on the webinar now.
Oh, Jerry's got it live now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, you can go ahead and start. Let me just provide context because we have some people here that are joining us for the first time from our internal audit department, the school fees team. And we're also, we have Dr. Steve Harassi here, who is now the State PTA Education Commissioner. And Dr. Harassi was a wonderful superintendent of Murray School District for many years, was our Title I director, and came to all of our meetings. He was always just wonderful to work with. So we're really, really glad to have him here today. Let's start with Jeff, and let's just go around either way. Go ahead and tell us.
Jeff Ojeda, McKinney Vento Specialist here at the State Board.
Can you tell us what that is?
McKinney Vento is homeless children and youth.
Okay.
Jeannie Rowland here at USBE. I am a teacher retention and recruitment specialist, and I'm a Title IIA officer, so that's why I'm part of this.
I'm Max Lang, and I also work here at USBE with Title I School Improvement, and State School Turnaround.
Leslie Evans, exactly the same workload.
Ditto.
Val Murdoch, former employee at Murray School District,
Ditto.
and also over Title I monitoring.
Noelle Converse, Special Ed Director in Granite, and I'm here on behalf of Charlene and myself.
Oh,
She is down at another engagement in Tucson, so it's 101 degrees.
Oh, wow.
I'm Robert Palmer. I work here at the Utah State Board of Education. I oversee some state grants, the Partnerships for Student Success, the Intergenerational Poverty, and the Program Quality Enhancement Grants.
Ian Fitch, I just started here at USBE in internal audit, recently coming from a CR England subsidiary, slightly different industry. So it's been fun hitting the ground running.
Charity Goodfellow with the USBE internal audit as well with the school fees team. So yeah, just recently started.
Great. I'm Becky Donaldson. I'm the ESEA coordinator here at USBE.
Steve Rossi, mostly retired. Instead of having a job, I do service now.
Now you have to
Or Utah PTA.
Good, I was like, don't do that.
So, Stella Estrada, wishing I was mostly retired.
No.
So, Title III specialist,
Seriously.
works with immigrants, refugees, and long-term, and other, let's say,
Various
sundry groups of people.
I'm Tammy Long, and I'm a compliance manager here at USBE, and I work with the federal programs and the state programs.
Do I have to come out from behind the curtain? I like to be the person who hides behind the curtain. My name is Becky Peters. I'm Becky's secretary and a few other secretary, Max's. Anyway, I'm also directing the online webinar portion of the meeting so that those who are, I do see that there's a few people online, so hopefully if they have any comments or questions, they can pass them along and join that way.
Thank you, Becky. So I don't think we have the minutes from the last meeting, but we'll look at the agenda. During the last legislative session, there was some legislation passed dealing with school fees. There's also a board rule and some other things taking place that we want all educators in the state need to be aware of. So I've invited Ian and Charity. I was going to call you Tamara. Ian and Charity to come today and talk to you. They lead the USBE school fees team. So they put together materials. They're going around speaking to various groups to try to educate everyone about what all these changes mean and what everybody's responsibilities are in ensuring that these policies and procedures are implemented effectively. So we'll turn time over to them in just a second, and then Max and Leslie, they've talked to this group a number of times about various issues related to school improvement, state turnaround. What they're going to present today is a formula and regarding funding that will go out to Title I schools that are identified as in the lowest performing Title I schools in the state, as well as high schools that have been identified under ESSA for low graduation rate. So starting in the fall, they're going to be allocating some funding. So what they're going to do today is show you what they're proposing to do, get your input, and then also need to take a vote on it. So we've several times requested input. Today is going to be look at it, take a motion, and take a vote. And then Jeff Ojeda works with our Migrant Education Program and also the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act. And throughout this past school year, we've had some issues come up with various LEAs and schools where students who meet the definitions of students experiencing homelessness have been denied certain services. They haven't been allowed to enter school, to register, to have access to services that are part of that law, that, meeting their civil rights. So Jeff is going to talk to us today about those things again, so we can build knowledge, build awareness, and get this message out to all of our various stakeholders. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Ian and Charity, and we'll let them talk to us about school fees.
So can I say something before we start? I just want to say to Ian personally and Tamara and Charity that after 25 years of not following an actual permanent injunction on school fees to ensure that public education is free for children, especially those that are the most disenfranchised, I just want to say what a huge difference you're making and how much we all appreciate the work that you're doing, because I know it's challenging.
Well, let me just add, Barbara Smith has joined us as well. Barbara represents parent organizations. She directs the Utah Parent Network, right?
Utah Family Partnership
Oh,
Network.
okay. And Barbara's been a great supporter. She was on the Davis District School Board for many, many years. She's very knowledgeable and is a huge advocate for public education. And Kim Doerr is the president of Academica West Charter Services. She works with quite a large group now of charter schools across the state. So Kim is here to represent charters.
I moved out of the way so somebody can take that seat and nobody will.
Well,
We've got some more seats too.
All right.
I forgot his deodorant today, so.
Okay, we'll get this going. So the first thing that we have the background that she already talked about. And just to reiterate a little bit of this, back in 1994, a little bit after school fees were made legal in Utah, a bunch of families took the state board and several schools to court over how the school fees were being implemented. And it led to this permanent injunction, which basically said you have to shape up everything. The findings were extensive. And again, this wasn't an audit, this was a court case where we lost. like a lot. And this permanent injunction was put in place. Now, fast forward to 2017, we did another audit of it and found not much had changed. And then another audit was done by the Office of the OLAG. I don't remember what that all stands for.
Legislative analyst.
Yes, they did another audit which found the same thing. So it went to the Hill, it went to the board here, and a lot of changes were put through to try to put things in shape where they were supposed to be. And that's where we're coming from right now. And this still has the attention of the Hill. They were talking about it today. This is... So we're trying to make certain that we actually get this right and make the change happen. And that's the summary of the background. The rules have gone through for R277407, and we're still tweaking those, trying to make certain we're getting everything right. And the law 53G57, whatever. So it is the public policy of this state that public education shall be free. That has been added to the law, that exact phrase in 53G7602. They are trying to turn things around, and this is a big part of that. So one of the things that they found in these audits, one of the big confusions is people didn't know what a fee was. They thought if they called it something else, it wasn't a fee. They thought if it was required but for an optional activity, it wasn't a fee. There was a lot of confusion on just about what a fee is. And at the end of the day, if you are asking a student or their parents for money, it's a fee. There are a few exceptions spelled out in law, but only a few. Specifically like fines for damaging property, yearbooks, unless they are required for something. The second they become required for something, they are a fee. And again, just a few exceptions, but at the end of the day, if they are asking for money, it's a fee. And it doesn't matter if it's through a fundraiser. It doesn't matter if it's called a donation. Any of that for any schools, let me go back to this emphasis down at the bottom, for any activity, course, or program that is provided, sponsored, or supported by an LEA, it is a fee. And that is leading to some fun conversations. So to quickly provide some clarification. So it's sponsored or supported. So here's some signs that something is sponsored or supported by an LEA. If they're getting free rent where everyone else has to pay, if they're being allowed use of the LEA name, if they are getting free advertising from the school, if the teachers or coaches are hyping it up big time, hey, we're doing this clinic this summer, you should all go to it. If they have use of the school directory to contact the students, if the LEA is directly handling the funds, any sort of commingling of that sort. So these are all signs that it is supported or sponsored by the LEA. With the quick clarification, official non-curricular clubs don't count, because those by definition can't receive support from the school other than that minimum level. Okay, continuing. The basic idea behind the law is in order to charge a fee, a single dime, it has to be brought before the governing board of the LEA and approved. And then if you're going to have a fee, waivers apply. Any fee has waivers that are applicable. So going back to this idea of going before the board, it has to be authorized and noticed by the LEA governing board. And it has to have some specific characteristics. They're all in the list. I don't want to bore you too much, but basically specific items, specific amounts for the fee. Fee maximums have to be there for the individual per activity and the aggregate for that student. So a cap of like 300 on volleyball or 500 for football. They have to set a maximum per activity and then say a student can pay up to $3,000 and everything after that will waive. So each LEA has to come up with their own amount for activity and the student aggregate. The spending plan, that one is currently the topic of many conversations as we try to determine what that means and how we're going to be applying that. Okay, who is eligible for fee waivers? This was spelled out in the injunction and in the recent update of the law. To go through this really quickly, a student that qualifies for free lunch, they do not have to receive free lunch, they just have to qualify for it. If the student is receiving SSI, if the family is receiving TANF funding, if they're in foster care or in state custody. And then the law actually phrases it this way. Those are all in the rule and injunction, but the law just got updated to say it this way. Any student that, if charged the fee, would be denied the opportunity to fully participate or complete a requirement because of an inability to pay the fee. That's kind of a broad statement. And that's a great help for those middle-class families that would otherwise be shut out of activities, who are making slightly too much for TANF or receive reduced lunch but not free lunch, who still can't afford $3,000 for a drill team. That phrase is how the law officially defines eligibility now. Okay, now to get into some of the specifics of the little changes here. Project-based courses, and this one has been a requirement since 1994. In project-related courses, the project required to get that A grade has to be free. 100% free to all of the students. A school can, if you're doing an extra project, if you want to build an armoire instead of a bookshelf, you can do that and they can make you pay for that. So optional or additional projects, they can have the student pay for, but those required projects have to be free for everyone. And then there's the rule of allowing if the class is all making bookshelves and someone wants to build a full-size pool table, they're supposed to avoid allowing stuff like that because of the pressure it applies on the other students. Okay, textbooks. They updated the definition of textbook in the law. Now a textbook means instructional material necessary for participation in an activity, regardless of the format. So the iPads that schools are now using instead of textbooks are now a textbook, by definition in the law. Anything required for the instruction of the student is a textbook. And starting with the school year 22-23, you can't charge fees for textbooks. We're still working out some of the particulars of how that's going to work, but that is coming up. So that's going to be another exciting conversation.
Ian, can you take questions now?
Yes, absolutely.
So if a student damages the iPad, then they would have to pay the...
Yes.
But a school cannot charge them a fee up front for insurance. Is that correct?
So one of the exceptions spelled out in law is a deposit that is refunded. So if they make them put down a $50 deposit that they get 100% back at the end of it, that is not a fee. If they have optional insurance, that is not required.
Optional insurance.
Insurance is spelled out as an exception, because normally the word optional has no bearing on the fee. But optional insurance is not a fee.
Okay.
That's the same if, like, I remember my high school provided insurance for the sports teams. It wasn't required, but you had the option. In that case, any type of insurance that they provide that is optional is not a fee. And then fines are a fee, except for the few that are spelled out in law. So truancy fines are now a fee, but fines for damaging school property are not. That's one of the exceptions spelled out. Okay. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions before I continue? Okay. School uniforms, they are not a fee unless they are prescriptive or expensive. Now there's some conversation about where exactly is the line for expensive. But prescriptive, we have a pretty clear definition of. If it is something you can only get through the school, if it has to be this exact color with this exact logo, that's prescriptive. If it is a military uniform, it's prescriptive. Anything like that is prescriptive. If it has to have the school logo on it and you can only get it through the school or this one store, that would count. But if it's just you have to wear a blue polo and khakis, that's not prescriptive. Now, school activity clothing, so any sort of uniform that's required for extracurricular or co-curricular activities. So the drill team has a warm-up outfit that everyone wears and it all matches. That is a fee. So a uniform for curricular, so for the school day, not inherently a fee. A uniform for the extracurricular or co-curricular, inherently a fee. Am I saying this right? Is that making sense? Okay. Okay, fundraising. It is no longer allowed to require individual fundraising. It is still permitted. Likewise, it is not allowed to require group fundraising. You cannot require them to show up for fundraising events. They can still have them, but for example, if the football team's having a group fundraiser and you miss it for whatever reason, they cannot deny you membership or participation because you missed a fundraiser. Okay, and they are no longer allowed to require provisions or service in lieu of fee waivers or in lieu of fees. And as I understand it, that was more of a thing in rural schools. So they're having to figure some things out. As I understand, a lot of other schools have already discontinued this because of the amount of other laws they have to follow for doing it. But if the parents request it, or the student for some reason requests it, the school can still do it, but it has to be requested. So some parents might still be having some fun with that. Okay, spend plan is required as part of every fee. We're trying to figure out exactly what a spend plan is, because that's kind of an ambiguous budget term, and it can mean many different things. They're figuring out what exactly they want that to look like. We'll have updates for you as those come. Right now, that's about all we got, is we're working on it.
Ian?
Yes.
So is that connected to the idea that, if a program costs something, you have to actually explain what the cost is, instead of doing a fee and nobody knows what it's being spent on?
Yes. Well, to connect this to a few other pieces of the law, I think there's slides coming up on them, but in case there's not, I'm just going to say it now. Some of the other changes is you cannot use one fee to subsidize or replace another fee. You cannot use football to pay for baseball through the fees. The gate sales, that's a different issue, but the fees to participate cannot be moved around like that. Likewise, the fee cannot be more than the activity or item costs. If you are paying a $20 fee for that school polo, it better only cost $20. I mean, or more, and you're giving them a discount, but it can't be more than that. So the spend plan is part of that transparency and making certain that the fees are being used appropriately. So again, they're trying to work out what exactly this means, but at the end of the day, they want parents to be able to look at that fee schedule at the beginning of the year and know every dollar that might come out of their pocket and know exactly what is being used for. So we're still working out some of the finer details of that. Like they probably won't say 50 cents of it's going towards beakers for chemistry. They might just say, chemistry supplies. But that at least gives you something. We're working on it. But those are all things coming up to further add that accountability. So the injunction from 1994 mandated corrective action. It actually mandated withholding funds for any school that violated these rules. Now the legislator has stepped in and said that it doesn't have to necessarily be withholding funds. It can also be suspending the authority to charge fees at all for a specified amount of time, or making the school refund the money. But corrective action is mandated by the law. There's the legal reference, 53G750. I won't bore you with all of it, but the legislatures want this to change. They want corrective action to happen, and the board also brought it into the rule to make certain that this problem actually gets fixed. So this is the basic flow charts, but the first step of it is just we work with them to fix the problem. We don't come in with the hammer, right? Hey, you're charging a fee that's not on the fee schedule. You know, we need to fix that. But if we cannot fix it after a try or two, because the corrective action plan actually has, or the flow chart, there's we go through 2 stages of corrective action plans before we go to financial consequences. So again, we don't want to come in here and just instantly say, you know, we're laying down the law. We come in and say, let's fix the problem. A lot of these might be innocent mistakes or people just forgetting, or there's all sorts of things, because a lot of this was genuine confusion. And something I will say, a lot of the schools already have been great about working with us. I remember we were sitting down with this charter, it wasn't their board, it was the heads of the school, the people who actually kept the place running. And they sat there and said, okay, what do we do in this situation? What do we do in this? Okay, we can do that. Okay, we're going to have to change this. They sat down, they figured out how to do it while still having opportunity for the students. And we have a lot of that. We actually had a school call in a couple weeks ago saying, hey, am I allowed to give them a waiver in this situation? And I was like, well, yeah, you can give a waiver anytime you want. You know, we're not going to say no. There's just certain times you have to, right? They were looking for the opportunity to do it. So while there'll certainly still be some uphill battles on some of this, some of the schools are really getting it and are really starting to apply it. Okay, one of the things that we're setting up is an LEA school fee contact with each of the LEAs. And while right now this is mostly as a contact between USBE and the LEA, in the future we want that contact to be someone that the public can contact with any sort of concerns about school fees in that LEA. Okay, so here's a timeline of the things coming up. So some of the things that are going to start next year are the new uniform rules about when is it a fee, when isn't it a fee. The certificates of compliance that the LEAs have to sign, we have a new process for that. The new HB 250 definitions, which again, we've kind of been over, just clarifying what is a fee, what isn't, will go into effect. And then some of the more general items, no individual fundraising, no required service, that all begins next year. For the school year 2021, they have to have, so the fee schedule has to be done by April 1st before the school year. There has to be time for people to see it. And again, they have to go through public meetings and public notice. The public has to have the opportunity to provide input on these fee schedules. There's going to be those maximums we talked about, the spend plans, language requirements. I forgot to include the slide on that. If an LEA has over 20% of their population that speaks as their first language something other than English, they have to have the fee schedule and those materials provided in that language. And for anyone whose parents' first language is something other than English, whether or not they speak English, if their first language is something else, the interpreter services have to be provided on a one-on-one basis.
I believe that is in the packet as
Yes,
well.
it did make it
I
into
will
the
find what
packet.
And just so we're clear, that actually is a civil rights requirement. This is not optional.
Yeah. So there shouldn't be too much of a problem with that. This is something they should already be doing, but now it's been included into this as well. And then for the school year 21-22, this is where they cap it. If the fee can't cost more than what the item costs, they're giving them a little bit of time to roll out that requirement, because that's going to require some adjustment on some of the LEA's parts. And then we're also giving them a 2-year window where we won't be taking corrective action. We want to give them time to get into compliance, because we just had 2 audits. We already know that they're out of compliance. The system as a whole is out of compliance. We're giving this system as a whole 2 years to get back into compliance. and then corrective action is mandated by law. So we have some time to figure it out. And then the next year is when there's no fees allowed for textbooks.
Page 9 was where that 20% was talked about.
Okay, so we now have the school fees website that will have lots of information in the coming days. We're going to have model policies for LEAs to use. We already have the info doc up. We're going to have some white papers up. We are going to be rolling out training for the LEAs to help them understand the process. Because again, a lot of this was genuine confusion. So we hope to be able to help with that. We hope to be able to roll out materials for the parents to understand what's going on. Because a lot of this will only work if the parents know what their rights are and what their end of this is. Then there's our contact information. It's also at the last page of the info packet you guys have. Now that the fire hose has ended, do you guys have any questions for us?
First, let me say I'm glad I'm mostly retired. So, with AP classes, with the tests, are those waivable?
The tests are specified as an exception in the law.
Okay.
AP tests. And concurrent enrollment, the amount paid to the college is also an exception spelled out in the law. Anything paid to the high school or anything like that, that is not an exception. But the $50 enrollment fee to SLIC or whatever, no, that you still got to pay to SLIC. They fall under a different set of rules.
Okay. And then, since I'm representing PTA, PTA kind of falls into that category since most schools allow the use of buildings and so on and so forth rent-free. I'm thinking of things like most of what they do is fundraising. So how does that apply? If they're fundraising for the school and they have a school carnival, kids that can't afford to participate aren't going to participate. So how does that all work into it since it's a fundraiser?
For those kids that can't afford it, fee waivers would still have to be applied. I mean, it's a very broad rule of anything that is sponsored or supported. It's actually affecting a lot of after-school programs right now. It's the point of a lot of conversations that we're trying to figure out. But until something in the rule changes, that's a very directly sponsored event. So those kids who couldn't afford it, you'd have to let them in. But for those others, I mean, hopefully they'd still want to support that fundraising effort.
What about like product-based types of things like scholastic book fairs and things of that nature?
That is an excellent question. I would assume, and this is an assumption, I can get you a better answer later, that would fall under something like the yearbooks,
Okay.
where that is in no way involved for actual participation for anything. If you were requiring it or even encouraging it for a class, hey, everyone go get these books and bring them, because the requirement is allowed to be an implied requirement. That's spelled out in the rule and the injunction. If they are strongly implying that it is required, it then becomes a fee. So if it's just its own thing, that's all right. But if the reading teacher is saying, hey guys, go get a book and bring it, then it would become a fee.
Okay. And then, is it possible to get a copy of this presentation if I want to do some training with local PTA groups?
I would assume yes. We haven't published this yet, but that's actually the first request for it. So let me find out, because we actually won't be running this. Well, this is actually, we'll probably get more requests for this. This is like our 9th presentation, but everyone else has just been yelling at us. So,
yeah, parents need to understand what their rights are, so I'm just thinking. That we
so I will
think.
And to explain it to principals, that would be really important as a district. Even if you don't want us to share it out publicly to everybody, it would really help in-house as a district.
So I will talk to the actual project lead. She's actually downstairs trying to figure out some of that accounting stuff. My sympathies to her. I'll ask her, and we will come up with something to provide you at the very
And
least.
training is in the works specifically for principals and people that are going to be involved. And we're looking into actually having that on Canvas because everybody's very familiar with the system. So that you guys can get on and direct them to that resource to have that training. And so it's definitely in the works.
And
Do you
for
have
the
an
PTA, we'll
estimated
figure something out.
completion for that?
Not yet.
Sometime before December?
Yes,
No.
we're hoping before the end of the
Yeah.
year, we will at least have that.
Me and her have been here since the end of February, and Tammy's been on this since January. So we're, I don't want to say chickens with, never mind, I'm just going to stop while I'm ahead. Okay, actually, Green Shirt had his hand up. I apologize, I forgot your name.
No worries.
It's better than being a red shirt.
I was just going to say in regards to AP tests, the College Board specifically has very specific and explicit fee waivers for any of their testing and anything that goes on with anything to do with College Board. So all of those AP courses or any of those fees can be waived without any hesitation.
That is good to know. We'll have to connect to those resources. And I don't know whose hand was up
It's
first.
on the ETS website. All you have to go to is Educational Testing Service, and then do fee waivers and download what they've said. They're pretty clear about it.
Awesome, thank you.
If we do a thing for parents, we really need a one-pager.
Some of the stuff on the website is already very brief summaries of these things. So, yeah, the info doc is not geared towards the
Oh,
parents.
no, I understand that, yeah.
But we do have, we have some frequently asked questions. We have it's double-sided, but a one-page summary of the big issues already on the
Oh,
website.
good, excellent, good.
And that website, again, is on the back page of that info doc.
It's a
Okay.
great resource to
A lot of us for elementary schools have like a partner after school that houses an after-school program, for example, YMCA. They don't pay for rent for our buildings. They pay a small minimal fee for any custodial, that type of thing, and they charge a fee. So does this apply because they use our buildings? Because that's what we've been telling them, that
Yes.
so if the kids are a fee waiver, they get to use the program for free.
Yes, and let me quickly again specify, fee waiver is more than those basic qualifications. There's that catch-all at the end for students who would otherwise be unable to participate.
And in elementary, that's why I wanted to follow up, because elementary, there are no fees in elementary allowed.
And we forgot
So-
this
That's why I
is
don't
not
want
our
it,
normal
so
slideshow,
they
I
really
apologize.
can't charge.
Well, elementary schools are allowed to have fees after hours. There are no fees allowed during the school day, period.
But we
Full
consider
stop.
it extended day activities, that's
And
where.
we're trying to figure out some of that gray area.
So that's still great.
Yeah, a board member Lear just brought up, what about the kindergartens that have the extended day? Where do you draw the line for that, right?
Well, we offer a full day kinder and they don't
Yeah,
charge
and
money, but.
we don't have the answer yet for some of those where it's extended day.
So we're still gray on whether they can charge a fee at all.
Well-
But if the child could not in no way pay or their parents can't pay, they get to participate without any
Well,
payment.
if they are just an after-school program, so I apologize, I'm new to education.
Okay.
If they are just an after-school program, they can charge a fee. Even in elementary school. After-school programs are specified as something that can be charged a fee in rule and law and in the injunction.
So they can charge a fee.
Yes, but it has to be waivable.
Okay, so now here's a question that's come up that I felt very uncomfortable with and I did not know how to respond, so I'm gonna ask it. Is the, like say, for example, the YMCA, I don't wanna give them a bad name, just asking for, as an example. What if they then say, well, let me have a list of all your fee waiver, because we don't give a list like that out.
No.
So that's what I'm saying, that's a no,
Well,
but how
let
can
me-
we give them that,
let me
how do we
quickly-
let them know?
So
We don't let
FERPA,
anybody.
yeah, FERPA still applies.
Yeah.
The rules for fee waiver specifically is no one who doesn't need to know can know.
Correct.
Right? But that's all it says. So the LEAs to some degree get to decide who needs to know. If they have a secretary who handles all of the fees,
that's where it's giving me a gut cramp because
Absolutely.
they're
Now,
not our people.
again, coming from trucking with very different rules, I don't know all of the requirements for FERPA. But I know my parents couldn't ask anything about my stuff in college, so I'm assuming the after-school program wouldn't be able to ask.
I would really like some guidance
But-
on that, from USBA on that, and how we can communicate that information while keeping, because I don't like giving lists of anybody.
Tomorrow.
There is no such thing.
Yeah, Robert Palmer and Camille Sheik, Camille's not here today, but they're over the after-school programs. They're actually having a meeting tomorrow that I think Ian and
We will be at that one
Charity
as
and
well.
Town are participating out. They're pulling in all those after-school providers to do a similar presentation.
And I'm sending a couple of representatives to that, so
Wonderful.
they're gonna be asking about that
Well,
specifically,
yeah,
because I
they
said,
will
you need to ask
One
that
of the
question.
AGs will be there,
Yes.
and they should be able to provide better clarification. All I can do is make an
Yeah.
assumption, which I'm saying is one, please forgive me for that. We will seek further
Because
clarification.
just so you know, that's being asked right now of us, which we have said, no, you cannot have that. And so we
Yes.
really need clarification on that. And I stalled them saying, well, we have a meeting coming up, so we're gonna ask that question
Okay.
there, but
Now-
I'm very uncomfortable.
I believe you have a question, and I think you had a clarification point.
Yeah, I think that.
If we can quickly go to that
So the
first.
clarification is, in the injunction, it's incredibly clear, and I think the state legislature actually does know this, that any kind of financial obligation that creates an undue burden on the family, if in fact we value families, is not allowable. The second point that I think is really important is that you actually have an obligation to provide information for families in a language they understand that says fee waivers are available to them. Unlike, I'm not gonna say who, but unlike groups of people who do not want to inform families, even though they're receiving federal funding for poor children, they don't want those families to actually know that they can come without paying a fee. So I think you have to think very, very clearly about not only what the state legislature says, but the intention of the injunction related to family. If you have 6 children and no one is telling you that you're eligible for a fee waiver because you have fee waivers in the district and the district is providing free rental, I mean, it's not
It's a
logical.
no-brainer, it's a no-brainer. And that's an undue burden to pay for 6 children to have an after-school program and they desperately need it.
To quickly go to some of the requirements, provide some clarification on that. So part of that fee schedule that's required that every student, when they sign up, and this has to be on every school website. So the elementary school, each elementary school's website, each high school's, each middle school's has to have the fee schedule on it. They have to include their fee waiver policy. Now, we don't know everything about how the monitoring program's gonna look, but we know that the fee schedules will be looked at for each LEA. And they will, at a minimum, have this, because this is a legal requirement, this is part of the injunction, this is part of the rule. This is a basic requirement, to have that waiver policy, and this is also in the packet that you have.
Oh,
And it even says it a little bit more clearly.
okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so we want the parents to know their rights, because that was one of the things the injunction found, that parents were being kept in the dark. That is something other court cases that districts have been brought to court found. There was a fun one from 1990 that was talking about that exact issue. That's what the rule says, the audits were finding this. This is a huge part of it. So we will be addressing that. And then whose hand was up for?
Just to open another can of worms for you.
Please.
A few years ago, the state legislature passed a law requiring school districts to allow organizations like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts to use buildings rent-free. So
It still becomes sponsored. To the best of my knowledge, that removes that financial obligation, but in no way alters this financial obligation. We're looking at clarification on some of these things. The after-school programs are one of the biggest conversations right now, because no one wants to put I just forgot their names. You were just talking about
YMCA.
the YMCA
Or the Boys and
or
Girls
the
Club, yeah.
Boys and Girls Clubs. No one wants to put them out of business or drive them out of our communities. But we need to make certain that those kids who need them most have access. So right now the rules set but we're trying to figure out what that should look like, if we need to make adjustments to protect everyone in this. So it is a can of worms, but we're doing our best to figure that out right now.
Ian, will this be added to that list of assurances that LEA superintendents or charter executive directors fill out on by July 1st of every year
Now,
in order to get funding?
as
Will
I
that
understand
become
it,
part of
they are already, it's already one of the
there.
items on it, and they have to have, I kind of skipped over that slide. It's already one of the, it has its own certificate that they have to fill out. Now, that being said, we have 30 boxes downstairs next to our cubicles with their attestation saying they've been doing it for every year for the last 30 years. We've already discussed the injunction and all of that. They will still be signing it, but we're going to be doing it better. Because USBE was found at fault as well in the audits and in the injunction. We were not monitoring, and when we found problems, we were not enforcing corrective action as was required. We are shaping up our acts, which I'm grateful for. That's how I got a job, so you know. But we are doing our best to change all of this, to turn it around. And then there was a question over here.
Yeah, my question was really related to training for the LEAs and for principals in particular regarding the catch-all at the end. What are the criteria? Are we going to define some criteria? Because that could be a real can of worms as well.
Yes. That is an ongoing conversation to some degree. Now that's a catch-all that will require them to use some of their judgment, which when you have that many people involved is always risky. You get 1,000 people's individual judgment.
Variability is probably going to be a
Yes. Now some of them have actually requested a change to the rule that we no longer use the TANF levels, but we use the levels set by the board. Because apparently TANF is just the family making a declaration, they don't have to prove anything. I don't know, I've no involvement in that. And they're asking for something that requires a firmer fence, as it were, a firmer date. We'll see what that looks like. I know that the injunction talked about the levels that are set are the same that were set back in the injunction. And they're only acceptable if the fee levels are acceptable. They were not acceptable then, and they have increased faster than inflation since then. We're figuring it out. We don't want to have to tell them how to do all of this. We'll figure it out.
One more follow-up. I came in right when you were making the reference between an extracurricular uniform and a uniform, say that the whole elementary school uses a certain uniform. So the uniform for the elementary school is not a fee?
Not inherently. So if it is an expensive uniform or a prescriptive. Now expensive to some degree is subjective. We all love those words, right? We're figuring that one out. But prescriptive, if it is this specific polo with the school logo on it, that's prescriptive. If it's just a blue polo you can get from any Walmart or Target with khakis.
Because we found, and ours is very simple like that, but we have found that a lot of our families, we have very minimal income, going to get that khaki or that is way different than just getting some clothes from a secondhand store. So we've always received donations to buy extras to do that because we've never denied anyone and always had that. So I'm surprised that's not.
Now, that's the wonderful thing about the word expensive as well. For some communities, that might be a lot lower. So
to find a blue collar shirt with no printing on it and khaki pants is way different than a secondhand store.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks are in secondhand stores, and that's a sacrifice for them to even have that.
And that is all, we're trying to take that all into account while still allowing the LEAs the flexibility.
I just
So, yeah, we really don't want to have to define the word expensive either. But
as
we're
long as
working
we
on
use
it.
decent practice and have some alternatives for them.
One of the LEAs we talked to, again, that charter school, that was super gung-ho. They talked about having polos that they can let people buy at discount or just have for free if they needed. Used ones that were still good enough that, I mean, they don't want students using ratty polos. That would kind of nullify the purpose of a uniform in the first place. Okay, we've gone 5 minutes over the time. Does anyone else have any other questions? None? Hey, we did a little bit better this time.
Feel free to contact us. The information is there. Conversations are happening. Questions are coming up. As you guys have these with the people that you interact with, send them to the website. And that school fees contact person that we are sending notifications every month as to, hey, this is what has been updated. This is the new information that is coming out. And we want to address all of these issues as they arise. It may take us time to finally work through it all and answer all of the things that we need to. But we're getting to a point where we can provide a system for all children to participate in regardless of their financial situation. And that's what this is about. And so we want these conversations to be happening, and we are available anytime to answer questions. People can call in, send us emails.
Yeah, one suggestion I'd like to make, because I get lots of phone calls from.
I'm just going to say no. I'm sorry.
No, I don't care.
You deserve that one.
So when resettlement agencies call me and a family goes to resettlement caseworkers and say, I just got a bill for $350. The best thing to do goes back to this idea of how we work together to really support, with internal audit complaints that I know internal auditing tracks brilliantly and resolves. So if we care about the future, and I'm just preaching to the choir, but I get calls like this all the time. I'm like talking all the time.
Every day, every week at least.
Where, some school, and I've been in education for a long time and been in high schools, in charge of high school budgets. And if you're denying the right of any child in Utah to participate, then the adults have a problem. So we have to figure it out.
One point of clarification on that, that other court case that I mentioned briefly, it was about the school restricting the fee waiver policy to the point of it only applying to those 5 categories, and also having it so obscure that students couldn't do it. We also have schools that are trying to say that if you don't apply for a fee waiver by like X date, you don't get one. That's not allowed.
Yes,
you cannot place an undue burden on the students in conjunction with the fee waiver policy. If things change if the fee's not due till April 1st for this trip, and they don't find out that they have a problem till, March 30th might be stretching it, but if they don't find out till a couple weeks before, the school has to find a way to work for them. Again, that phrase in the law, let me find it, I really like the way they phrase it. Any student that would be denied the opportunity to fully participate. Or they'll say you can't file an appeal after this date. No, an appeal is required as an option by law. We're trying to make certain that people know these, and I don't want to paint the LEAs as bad guys. A lot of them are trying. A lot of this was genuine confusion. We're sorting it out, we're training them, we're trying to figure out this kind of really complicated system. It's fun, right?
One last clarification, it used to be that each Board of Education, in conjunction with school fee waivers, could require some type of a service. Has that been taken away?
That has been taken away. So you missed that slide. They
I
can't.
just, sorry for, I wanted to clarify because
Yeah.
the person never read that.
They can't require. It can still be requested. So if there's some parent that wants their student to work off
Right, but
their
we
trip.
can't ask it and expect it anymore.
Yes. And another minor little thing, they can't, as soon as the family comes in asking for fee waivers, they can't try suggesting an installment plan. The family can ask for an installment plan, the school is not legally able to suggest it. So we're sorting these things out, but a lot of protections have been spelled out in law. If you guys want a really entertaining read, HB 250 isn't that big, but it has a lot of really fun things in there.
And there's a link on the website to that pass bill.
Becky said that maybe she could get the PowerPoint and then send it out to us, so that's up to you guys.
Yeah, I just have to check with the project lead.
I don't think it'll be a problem, but.
I've sat in on, this is about my 4th presentation about fee waivers from different lawyers and stuff.
My sympathies.
And my concern on the flip side is the conversation I hear from traditional districts as well as charters is they'll just stop doing certain things. Are you hearing that?
We're hearing that a lot. Now,
Yeah.
I can answer the words of the legislature and the court injunction. They want them to have those conversations. The way the injunction phrased it is if the program is of use, if the program is of worth, it's of worth to the poor students too. And if you're going to be providing it for the kids with money, you have to provide it for the kids without money. Now, I went to Disneyland in high school. I'm going to be honest, there was no educational value. It was a ton of fun though. So I know that they have these other experiences attached. And if they want to still provide those, they can. But they need to decide what they actually want to provide and what they can provide. Because again, they can only provide it if they can provide it to everyone.
That's right.
The legislature just 4 months ago was talking about, there were multiple, I don't remember their names, but multiple people up on the Hill saying they wanted these hard conversations to happen. Now again, I enjoyed those experiences we all did. We want to try to provide the best experience, but we need to provide it to everyone. It's the way that the injunction and the legislature phrased it.
The sad thing about those things going away is kids whose families can afford it will still have those opportunities outside of school. Kids whose parents can't afford it will never have that opportunity.
But they might have other opportunities because that money went to other programs that would directly service them as well. The schools have to figure out that balance. And it is a hard conversation. I'm not meaning to make light of this. And where the answer is in that, I'm not paid nearly enough money to make those decisions. So, my sympathies to those who do have to make those.
And I would just say that as an LEA representative, the legislature needs to continue to fund education at higher levels because many of the confusing aspects that end in some of these bending of rules and things that become inequitable come as a result of trying to figure out piecemeal ways of giving experiences to kids. I completely agree with access for all. That's what we do, and that needs to happen. And the hard conversations are good ones to have, but we need to fund at higher levels as well.
And that's another conversation that was still happening at the Hill, but I can't speak for them, so who knows where that will go.
Yeah.
But that was something that they're talking about.
And it also brings more value to partnerships with districts and foundations, because if experiences are truly educational and important enough, then they can find sponsors and donations. So it gives opportunity. We just had a training today about how we're going to be with donations and deal with it electronically. So it all has to be approved and all that, and fundraising and things. So everyone gets to go to things, and it's all through our foundation now. It's not separate of our foundation, so it's all filtered, has a board and our superintendent. So it just gives an opportunity for strengthening.
Make sure you guys go through those info docs, because there's more information that we can't cover all of it in here. Donation rules got updated. Fundraising rules are updated. Equitability within the district. You can't have one school being impacted unequally by the fee waivers. Things like that. There's a lot of moving pieces to this. It's complicated.
And on that note, since you're new, I would hope that you would continue to reiterate the fact that we are helping people to get this.
Yes.
We are big, at the USBE, we're big on technical assistance and support. And so I hope that you keep that message going.
And we are doing our best to do it. Again, we've had many presentations on this. We hope to have many more. We're going to be providing training. We want to provide training videos, training documents. Because I can't emphasize this enough, a lot of the problem was genuine just confusion, people not knowing. And we're trying to fix that.
Well, you're very genuine and you're very approachable. And so I would imagine that anybody you deal with is going to be at ease.
I think
We appreciate that.
it works until the snark comes out. But I'm working on it. My wife's helping me, so we'll get there.
Ian even took the time one afternoon to meet individually with one of our community-based organizations to explain it.
And we spent 2 hours on the couches downstairs, just making certain that all of the assurance that we could provide was there. So if people have questions, send them over. We now have the newest addition to our team. We're growing, we're going to make this work. So that's all I got for today. I think I'm going to be seeing like half of you tomorrow. So there'll be more questions there, and we'll have more people to help answer some of those trivia ones. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great job.
And did anyone need some of these to take with them? Anyone want one? We have them on the website as well. Okay.
Thank you. So we'll turn time over now to Max and Leslie to share with us their proposal for funding the schools identified under ESSA as comprehensive support and improvement schools.
Thank you. Seemed like such a good day to talk about money. Let's talk about some more. So we're reaching the end of this row. We've talked with you folks a number of times regarding funding schools, as Becky said, identified for comprehensive support and improvement. So what Leslie and I are going to do today is propose to you the actual the numbers and how we're going to allocate these funds out. Considering this is the last time that this group will meet until the beginning of the school year, we hope we can get to that conclusion so that we can be prepared when school starts to have these funds moved out. So to start, I'll just, in your materials, there's a handout here that looks like this. It says Committee of Practitioners, School Improvement. I'm going to set just a context, and then I'm going to jog your memory about past decisions we've made, because I think this is probably the third time with this group that we've had this conversation about this. So just to jog your memory, there are two types or two designations of school improvement under ESSA. One is Title I CSI, or Comprehensive Support and Improvement for Achievement. These are Title I schools in the lowest 5% of Title I schools in the state for 3 years on average. This past year, meaning 18-19, so this school year, we identified 18 Title I schools in that designation. The other designation for CSI is Comprehensive Support and Improvement for Low Graduation Rate. This is any public high school with a graduation rate equal to or less than 67% for 3 years on average. Just as an aside, that also included alternative high schools in this identification. We'll be meeting with that group tomorrow. So there were 17 high schools that were designated CSI in this past school year. And just again for context, ESSA requires that a portion of a state's overall Title I allocation be set aside specifically for schools identified in school improvement, or to be used for those endeavors for school improvement. So the other piece of that is ESSA allows a little bit of flexibility in how those funds can go out to those schools. It allows, and what it says is you can either do a formula amount, you can do a competitive amount, or you can do a combination of both, you can do formula and competitive. So if you remember, the first time we met, we put this to a vote, and this group decided that the best use of those funds would be a combination of formula amount and competitive amount. The next time we met after that, we talked about how would we determine the formula. What indicators would we use? And that was a very robust discussion. We wrote things on the wall. And essentially, we came down to 3 general indicators here. The first one was, in general terms, it was the size of the school. So the per pupil allocation is where we landed. The other one was an identification of Title I. So it would be percent poverty, a range, and the funding would be an indicator as such. The last one was particular student groups in the school. And the one student group, because at the time when we met, we were still determining this other category of ESSA school improvement is called targeted support and improvement, and it's for particular student groups in the school that get identified and those types of things. So the one that we had presumed was going to be a big one, and we were right, were the English learner student group. So those were the three major indicators, and here in a second Leslie's going to walk through those numbers specifically, that we determined we would use to do an initial formula allocation for schools identified as CSI. The other piece of it then is the competitive piece. The competitive piece we landed here would be mainly based on, or almost it'd be exclusively based on, identified costs for evidence-based strategies in the school improvement plan that address the root causes of low performance. Those costs that were found to be beyond what was needed in that formula amount. Yes?
Just a clarifying question. So the CSI on the high school graduation, they can be Title I or not Title I?
Yes.
So, okay. And we're not looking at this year's test scores?
So, yeah, these schools were they were identified this school year based on the past 3 years of data.
So the conversation of when you're going to include this year's test scores later.
Yeah, that's a whole different, yeah, that's a...
Yeah.
So that's just based on gravity, however.
Right. That one would be an easy one, yeah. But, okay, so the lowest 5%, we're talking about last year.
So it would have been the last 3 years on average falling in the lowest 5%.
Right, but not including the May test scores.
Not including this year. No, the schools were identified this year based on
They've
past
already been
years.
identified, now that's part of getting out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's a different conversation.
And identified
Whole
later.
different conversation.
So I'm going to turn the time over to Leslie to talk about a little bit of the specifics of the numbers that are associated with the formula.
I mean, we're here to talk about the overall plan. The first change is we have a little bit less money in the total available. I just found that, but it's $2,910,337. Sorry. 2,910,337.
And the reason, so as Max said earlier, that the first year we got ESSA funding under ESSA, rather than NCLB, was the federal fiscal year 2017, which was state fiscal year 18. And so during that first initial year of funding across the nation under ESSA, states were told to withhold 7% of their total state Title I allocation for the purposes of school improvement. But the second year, when we got our federal fiscal year 2018 fund, which was state fiscal year 19, hold harmless kicked in for LEAs. So if LEA's Title I allocation was going to be decreased by a certain percentage, when our financial operations ran those numbers through the formula, there were some LEAs we could not withhold any funds from for the purpose of school improvement. So that first year we set aside about $6.2 million for that 7%. This past year it was much less than that because of hold harmless, and also our state allocation of Title I decreased $6 million between those two federal fiscal years. So this money is going to be fluid. It's never going to be a set amount. Like state turnaround is $7 million every single year that the legislature appropriates. This is going to fluctuate. And if there were ever a year when every single LEA had to be, included in that hold harmless provision, there would be $0 that would be set aside for school improvement. Even though schools would be identified, they would be required to go through the process, there would not be funding. So it's very fluid from year to year how that's going to work.
On a bright note, this upcoming year, we initially thought we were not going to have enough funding to fund both the Title I schools in CSI and the high schools in CSI, but we've discovered that for this upcoming year, we'll have enough funding to fund both of those categories. So
I thought it'd be useful just to get a snapshot. This doesn't show everything on this spreadsheet, so I apologize. But if you look at the total enrollment for each of these schools. Those are all of the schools that are identified under ESSA for improvement. There's a total of 11,854 students. We decided we'd give $100 per pupil, so that would equal that $1,185,400. And then we broke the economically disadvantaged percentages into those two. Of course, there always has to be a cut somewhere. So if you go from the 35 to 74% poverty rate, we would spend $170,000 on those schools because there are 17 times 10,000. And then for that higher poverty percentage, from 75 to 100, we allocated $20,000 per school, and there are 16 of those, so it's about half and half, and that would come to $320,000. So then you move over to the TSI designations. You can see TSI EL 01 indicates they were identified for targeted support and improvement. To give a little more information about that student group, the whole school itself might be pretty high up on the ranking list, but that student group performed lower than the lowest 5% of Title I schools. So there's the idea behind that designation is there's a large gap. So we decided to give some funding to those schools at the rate of, was it 10,000? Mm-hmm. Yes. So there are 13 of those schools, so that would be that $130,000. And so on the back of the first page, you'll see, there it is, the formula that didn't cut onto the picture. So if you take the total, 2.9 million, and subtract that formula amount, which is 1,805,000, give or take, then we'd be left up with about 1,104,900 for competitive grants. So when we played with the numbers and we sort of looked at that, we felt pretty good about it, but wanted obviously to get your vote on that. So if there's any suggestions or you're noticing questions.
And I just want to compliment you on the idea of the formula and then relationship to, for me, it's always about the allocation of funds, but it's about how LEAs are evaluating the effectiveness of programs and then how they're redesigning it based on the funds they're getting. So they shouldn't be doing the same thing that they did to get it in this mess. And so I think the technical assistance point that that Jeannie is involved in, I think is a really critical issue in the relationship to building the capacity of the LEAs to really evaluate programs by actually identifying the schools that are doing amazing work already in their districts. And then using that as exemplars to help them so they're not so.
So this is funding for this academic school year. This is separate from
the expiring funding.
Okay.
Forget about that. Yeah.
This funding will expire in September
Right, so that's the
2020.
Kind of normal.
Yeah, the normal.
So if when normal happens, change.
That's really sad, I know, but that's,
Just another,
Yes.
in terms of the TSI, the second most frequent group is students with disabilities. I think it's important to, there's not a ton of money for this, for CSI in general. I think if there could be some way that we could, outside of allocating the funding the way you did for ELS, I think that's a good formula. Some way to foot stomp a bit the importance of considering students with disabilities in some very specific way in the plans, and how that's going to be addressed by partnering, collaborating with your local special education department. That's not currently strong enough in what's going on out there. So most LEAs I think will intuit to collaborate district-wide across departments to glean the best approach to solve the problem of that disparity in progress. But I think if there was some way to be a little stronger with, you have to, we're the funding source. you have to consult the experts in your, that would help.
Yeah, TSI does require a plan for each student group. I know, I mean,
It
at the
just-
LEA level.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're in a school and improvement, we're mulling around, and I'm sure we'll be back to the committee of practitioners, ways to more tightly align the indicators in special education to the needs assessment and root cause analysis.
Yes, because
and
we
then
had
plan development.
43 schools.
Right, yeah, I was gonna say, this isn't to ignore students with
No, and I
disabilities
recognize that.
radically differently funded, correct? And I mean, that's where I come from, special ed, so it's not that I've forgotten.
No, I realize that, and I understand the need to, I mean, we have a funding source.
Yeah.
So that's not what we need. What we need is something
Just an
very
emphasis,
demonstrable.
so LEAs
Well
have
taken.
to
Yes.
address their
Correct.
students with disabilities as part of their overall improvement plan, not, you know,
Rather
not
than
just
something
focused,
separate.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kind of confused off of that, coming as an LEA, is that when we got that list of TSI in all of our schools, we took that on as a responsibility as a district.
Right.
That we needed to meet with each of the schools. Each school then needed to meet with the ones that were designated as EL with our teacher specialists in that area, or EL specialists. If they were designated students with disability, they needed to coordinate with our director of SPED to figure out what needed to be in their plan. And then I set aside funding in title out of our district allocation to help support them in that work. We took that on as that responsibility where you can't go lone now as a principal with your school thinking this is best, this is what my SPED teachers think, or this is what my EL folks think. No, we need to come back to the specialist in those areas, coordinate with you, and make sure it's a solid plan and looks differently than what you've done in the past.
Sure,
And we'll help fund it.
and
Provo
most
did the same thing.
And most LEAs will do that. But because it's not specifically articulated, and because you assign funding specifically to ELs and there's nothing mentioned about what to do with students with disabilities, it opens it up for interpretation of whether or not it's important. That's the
Do
piece
one or
I'm trying
more
to get at.
TSI
I think
student groups.
well, I think the question, that's not the question. I think the question ultimately goes back to this idea of it's the LEA's responsibility, and then how does USBE then support the LEAs in thinking through this? Because we actually have good examples of LEAs who are doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
We don't have the answers yet, but we're trying to put the systems in. But I also want to bring us back to the TSSA, the Teacher Student Success Act. I think that's already in place, because if you look at the TSI, the requirement is very clear that said that the LEA needs to approve the plan. But now with the TSSA, every single school plan has to be approved by the Board of Education. I don't know about anybody else's Board of Education, but our Board of Education has always taken that extremely seriously with land trusts, and that's what it's mimicked off of, exactly, of land trust. And they're already part of the team to review it. We're having 2 reviews before they put their stamp of approval on our school plans. So it's there. It is serious. TSI has to be identified, which groups, what are the plans, and the Board of Education. And then there's also a component, just like with land trust, that's sent to the state office of how the money was spent, how it was impactful. It's got actually more teeth in it now.
No,
We have to
absolutely, I
present it to our
agree.
Board of
But
Education
again,
in
it's
the
couched
fall.
in the lowest 25% versus, whereas this very specifically really nicely articulates, we have some schools who are not low-performing schools who are identified as students with disabilities. I love that data point has come out, because it demonstrates that or ELs in a high-performing school or what have you. And that really demonstrates that even schools that are doing quite well can be missing a subgroup. And I just am hoping for just a little bit more, not teeth as much as explanation that it should be a comprehensive plan to address each group in a way that your LEA, approves of. And I feel like right now, I was part of the TSSA approval group. We are working on TSI, but in reading it, I just didn't see this very specific piece about students with disabilities to be in the way that I saw it for L's and for other pieces. And that's, that's my background. So I wanted to just be able to point to that a little bit more to say, we have to braid everything together really tightly in this.
I think some of that feeling will come at the end of this cycle as well, when a school could be identified for comprehensive support and improvement based on just their student years. And then all of a sudden, that's probably going to be very, very important. And hopefully that work.
Well, hopefully we'll be able,
before that.
that's kind of the argument we're using already, is, this will be a sanction at the end of this process. So.
Thank you.
Jump in the notes.
Would anyone like to make a motion?
I move that we accept your proposal, that it's solid and equitable.
Oh, good.
I realized it sounded the other way.
There's a second back here. I'll second that.
Do I do something?
Yeah, you
Okay. All in favor of approving this formula and competitive?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
So there's two hikers out in the desert.
They found the dead Thank you, that's all right.
TSI.
I turn this time now to Jeff to talk us through.
Well, hello, everyone. I appreciate the time to speak with you. And I got you at the end of the meeting, so we'll be here till 6, and it'll be great. Wow, look at that. I just want to draw your attention to the color sheet that you have. The purpose for my speaking with you, there's a lot of confusion about determining the definition for homeless students. And I know in some districts there's a large population of doubled-up families by choice that often gets confused with being McKinney-Vento students. And so in order to kind of clarify that, hopefully this flow chart will help you out. So on the left side of this chart, you'll see that any arrow that points in that direction is the definition and meets the definition of a McKinney-Vento student, a homeless student. And on the right-hand side, if there's an arrow pointing in that direction, it does not meet it. So under nighttime residence, as an example, if the nighttime residence is missing one of the following traits, if it's not fixed, if it's not regular, if it's not an adequate place to live, then that family does meet the definition of McKinney-Vento. Sorry.
It's okay.
If those three criteria are met and are visible, then that family does not meet the McKinney-Vento definition. Look in the blue section for doubled up families. If a family is doubled up or a student is doubled up due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar situation, that could even include things such as, say, a secondary student who is going through abuse in their own personal home and they're trying to get away from that. Okay? That does meet the definition of McKinney-Vento, and so therefore that student would be considered so. But if it's a mutual decision where a girlfriend decides to go live with a boyfriend and the boyfriend happens to be in that general area for the school, in that situation, it's likely that it's not McKinney-Vento because it's a personal decision being made where it's not because of any hardship, it's a choice that person is making.
What if it's, here's where it gets a little weird for us,
Sure.
is like the parent is living with the grandparent. But then it's because, it's like, why, because it's hard, I don't have enough money, so it's economic hardship.
That would be. So that we would consider that
Even if they don't
McKinney-Vento.
want to tell you that.
Right. But if they're living with grandma because their house is going to be completed in 3 months
Yeah,
because
that's
construction
all.
isn't quite done, that's something different.
Got it, thank you.
Hotels, motels, and trailer parks, again, if it's due to a lack of alternative accommodations, then that does meet the definition of homelessness. If it's a family choice, then that does not meet it. Now go ahead and flip your pages over. If for any reason they're in a place that's not meant to be lived in, regardless of what that is, or it's substandard housing, then clearly those people meet the definition of McKinney-Vento without exception. unaccompanied youth. Family lost housing, or the child lives apart because of domestic violence, as I mentioned earlier, then yes, that by definition meets the criteria and definition for McKinney-Vento. If the parent has a work conflict, which sometimes happens, and they've made arrangements with the family, the grandmother as an example, or grandparents, that does not meet the McKinney-Vento definition. Also, if a parent is incarcerated or hospitalized and arranged for the child to be with a family member while that's going on, that's not a homeless situation. That's a specific decision that the family has made. All right, so hopefully this handout helps you out. I'll make sure that Becky has it digitally, so she sends it to everybody, and please spread that out to anyone and everyone that you think it might be useful for.
So if the parent decides that the child gets in too much trouble in one area or whatever in the home situation, it's better to go and live with grandma in another school area, is that considered a homeless child?
That would not be, because it's a family decision that has
They
been
made a
made.
decision that they're better off with that
Exactly.
family member, so
Exactly.
that's not homeless.
Exactly.
That's very good.
And I know that there's confusion sometimes in some of these, and it's a case-by-case basis, because every single case is different. So what we're talking about here may just
May or may
in
not.
view,
I
just
wanted
work
to
out
check
that
on
way.
one
But there may be
particular
something within that situation that may make it that indeed that is something that we can perform down. So it is a case-by-case, and if there's ever any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. We can make those determinations. Yes.
I had a question recently I didn't know how to answer from a shelter.
Okay.
And I know that the school district is responsible for transporting the student to the school when they're living in a shelter, et cetera, et cetera. But are there any monies available through this act or other where the shelter could apply to have a teacher on site? And is there a certain number? So if I have 5 children of school age, can I request the district to send a teacher on site? Anything like that?
It is something that the district can do, but it is up to the discretion of the district. Now, we're not talking about, or the LEA. So we're not talking about a huge amount here. I mean, we were saying 1.4 million wasn't a lot. This is far less. The statewide money that we get from McKinney-Vento is roughly about $450,000. That gets divided into accounts for districts who actually apply for those funds, and it's a 3-year cycle. So we're currently finishing up the 2nd year of the cycle, and this coming year will be the last year of the cycle. So in April of the coming year, you should be receiving an email specifically with the application for McKinney-Vento funds, and that application needs to be completed and filled out. And then that's how we are funding and have been funding McKinney-Vento for quite some time.
So could a shelter apply for that?
Yes, they can. It's open to any community group that actively supports McKinney-Vento students. And so while the funding McKinney-Vento funding, sorry, let me go back. McKinney-Vento funding is specifically meant for districts, but you can work in conjunction with a community group to help support something.
But if the district doesn't want to be involved?
Then they don't have a requirement to.
Because I know that some of these shelters we've done adult ed funding with, but is there any funding for school-age children for a shelter?
No, the funding specifically stays in the LEA, and it's given out in services, whatever those services might be, but it's never a dollar amount that goes to a shelter for whatever reason.
And Jeff, I wanted to just clarify, it was my understanding last year that the homeless designation is valid for that one academic year. And
That's
it's our responsibility as a district then to see what is the situation with each of the families. Because what our district had been doing is, once they were designated, it just kept rolling over.
It just kept being.
And that's what, and so we cleaned that up this year, so it's, whoa, in December it was a lot less, and then we finally got the systems in place, so now we've designated, it's still back up to a higher number, but now we have a better system in place. It'll be accurate each December now, so just so you know, when you see a low number in December for August, it's like, Yeah, it's because we cleared it all out and then people did double check.
Yeah,
And now we have the systems of double checking, so we have a much better system.
and that's fantastic, that's
Yeah,
exactly
so
what
we're
we
cleaning
need.
that up. 'Cause,
So for those of you that aren't aware, if a student is designated a McKinney-Vento student, they become homeless, say in January, and a month later, the family's able to kind of get back on their feet, find good housing, that child still should receive the remaining services for McKinney-Vento until the end of that academic year. And then, by definition, every year, the LEA is required to review the McKinney-Vento students that are on their list to ensure that they still meet that definition, as well as continue to seek other students.
So to force that, we clear it. I mean, we print it out, but then we clear it in SIS and then we have to reestablish it. Otherwise, it gets lost and it just keeps adding.
Any other questions for me?
Do you want to talk about migrant? I know she
I did include a handout in migrant, and I just wanted to specify that migrant and immigrant are two completely different things, and oftentimes people get that confused. So just to make sure that everybody hears the same thing, migrant education student is a student who has or works or has parents that work in agriculture and fishing and are traveling through seasons with the crops. So very different than immigrant, and sometimes those words are used interchangeably. In fact, like frequently they are, especially in the press. So I just wanted to make sure that this group was well aware, and I wanted to give you a handout so that you had something to kind of share with your folks as well.
Thank you, Jen. I want to thank you all for being here. Becky, did you have any questions at all from the people that were participating online?
There was one in regards to some information, let's see where it is, about the points of data and fiscal breakdown for the 103 stuff. I'm not sure if it was in the handout, so I indicated that if it wasn't there to get a hold of you two.
Yeah, I noticed the screenshot like kind of cut off part of it, so that's.
Oh,
I'll respond to emails.
Yes, that's what something was asking.
So anything you want to know, just call Matt, is that right? Or-
I can say, I don't know the best of them.
We're posting Max's name and number.
I thought I saw it in the new back.
That's why there's a hole in it.
So our next meeting, we plan for October 9th. We'll be here again in the same room, and so we'll send reminders out. Once we have the minutes put together, I'll send the minutes out to everyone, and you'll have an opportunity to clarify or add if you think there's something that's missing from the minutes or you want to clarify, we will do that. Thank you so much for your service on this committee. It's really helpful to us, and we're very grateful for your support. Wish you all a wonderful summer.
How you doing?
Good.
You'll be PTA today.
Me personally?
Yeah. It's from.
I think. No, I love it. You know, we, in the past, we had state school requirements, and then we had.
I think she's with the Mesa. Yeah. I know, yeah. I don't know that one. She's just doing great. She's got a hard year last year, but she's doing these. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, thank you. Well, it's your stuff and everything.
Oh, questions?
I guess that's what we do.
Thanks for meeting where every time I feel like it's a superintendent dealing with that. And I spoke, essentially, in a lot of cases, it's essentially